in a more uncertain, more divided world, Canada and Australia are middle powers charting our own course with confidence, ambition, and partnership. We're doing that together because we've grown up together. And with an ocean between us, we may not see each other quite as much as we'd like, but whenever we do, like family, it feels like no time has passed.
Prime Minister Mark Carney departed Australia today with a warm send-off from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Carney's speech in the Australian Parliament this week touted similarities in heritage and political institutions in the two countries, while reiterating a need to partner on the challenges of our time.
Although we could not be further physically apart, Canada and Australia are strategic cousins. We helped to build the post-war international system, to draft the UN Charter, and to create a global economic order that brought prosperity to our peoples. Yes, that system was imperfect, but it functioned, keeping sea lanes open, resolving disputes, growing trade and investment, and narrowing the gaps between rich and poor across the world. With that global architecture now breaking down from consecutive crises, I've come to Australia at your invitation to reaffirm our alliance and to suggest where it can go next.
For more on the outcomes of this trip, I'm joined by former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, who was in attendance for Carney's speech last night. Thank you very much for joining us today, sir. Prime Minister Mark Carney has for weeks now been urging middle powers to unite. It was a key point of his speech in Davos, but last night it was a message tailored to an Australian audience. What did you make of Prime Minister Carney's address to Parliament?
Well, it's a great address. The arguments he's making are very powerful. They're very realistic. Carney's presenting a clear-eyed, positive, strong view of the world, above all realistic. He recognises that middle powers need to work together. And this is a point I've been making too. I mean, lots of people have made this point, but Mark Carney is the first national leader of a major country to make this argument so clearly. And it cut through at Davos. It's been inspiring, and it was inspiring when he repeated it in an Australian context this week.
What is your sense of how that message, you talk about it cutting through, but what is your sense of how that message is sort of resonating in middle powers, and do you see it leading to any sort of change or new bonds of unity?
Yeah, look, it's resonating very well. And I have to say that other leaders have said similar things, but perhaps not with as much impact. I mean, Emmanuel Macron in particular has been making this point as well. And I know he and Mark Carney are very close. Look, I think the question is, what do you do about it? Now, we have some good examples. And again, Prime Minister Carney identified them. Think of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That big trade deal involved 12 Asia-Pacific countries led by the United States, looked like it was stone cold dead when Donald Trump pulled out of it at the beginning of 2017. Australia, working with Japan, kept the deal alive. And so it became the TPP-11 or the CPTPP. The UK has since joined it. The European Union, as Macron announced at Shangri-La last year, is seeking to affiliate with it. And, Carney highlighted this. Imagine you've got the 11 countries of the original TPP, ex the US, plus the UK, plus the European Union. That is an economic unit or economic, if you like, alliance that is much larger than the United States. So middle powers have real agency when they work together.
So much of this effort led by Prime Minister Carney has to do because of the volatility in the United States right now and the unpredictability of U.S. President Donald Trump. Are you surprised we're in a moment right now where, the volatility and unpredictable nature of an American president is triggering these kinds of conversations and reflections?
Well, it sure is. There's no question about that. I mean, Trump does not regard, and his administration do not regard the rule of law as applying to them. They do not regard, I mean, in their own national defence strategy, they describe the international rules-based order as, and I quote, a cloud castle abstraction. So they're treating it with contempt. So they haven't even sought to argue that their, attack on Iran was not a breach of international law. They regard it as not applying to them. In other words, they are saying quite openly, you might say quite honestly, that might is right. But nonetheless, we can't get down in the dumps about this. We've got to have agents. We've got to be positive. And if I can just say, one of the great things about Carney's visit was that he projected optimism, confidence, positivity, and so did his colleagues. The finance minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne, who I'm sure you know so well, he was so charismatic and enthusiastic. I mean, I saw him speak to a big dinner of all of Australia's business leaders, and he really energised the room. I mean, this visit has put an energy into the Australia-Canadian relationship which it has lacked. I mean, when I was PM, I couldn't get my counterpart, Mr. Trudeau, interested in Australia. And, we just felt the Canadians were interested in other things, the Americans, the Europeans, or whatever. It's fantastic from our point of view to see Canada being enthusiastic about a partnership with Australia. But, we'll both have to invest a lot of time and effort into it.
I want to ask you about what came out of this trip and some of the announcements, but because you brought up the situation right now in Iran, given the Prime Minister's speech and given sort of this call for middle powers to work together, what role do you see middle powers taking as this conflict in the Middle East, as this war expands?
Well, we're not participating, but I think what we need to do is obviously uphold our values and be, just speak truth to power. And I think the messages you've heard from Carney and Albanese and other leaders is that this should be de-escalated as quickly as possible. I mean, there is a real risk. Nobody is seeking to defend the Iranian regime. Everyone, I think, particularly the Iranian people, would welcome a change of regime there, assuming it is a change for the better, which is a big assumption. But what we don't want is for this war to continue to expand wider into the region and beyond.
You talked about the energy as a result of some of the meetings between Canadian officials and Australian officials. Is there one sort of announcement or one sort of plan or pledge that stands out to you that you see can be the most successful between Canada and Australia as a result of this trip?
Well, let me highlight three. Could be forgiven for that. I think defence cooperation is very important. I mean, Mr. Carney said Canada wants to dramatically increase its defence expenditure, but it wants to spend more on Canadian industry and with partners beyond the United States. Over 70% of your defence procurement spent with the Americans. That's clearly excessive concentration. And so we welcome the opportunity to do more with Canada. With critical minerals, plainly, we need to work together on that. Yes, we've both got lots of rare earths, for sure. I mean, they're not that rare, to be honest. But what we need to do is start doing the processing, because what China is dominating is not so much the mining of rare earths, but the processing of them. Yes, it can be environmentally dirty, but with technology, we can make it clean. It will cost more. We've got to be prepared to pay that extra price. And so I think there's a lot on that agenda. And finally, Canada has some of the most sophisticated investment institutions in the world, particularly with its big pension funds. So does Australia with our big superannuation funds, and the opportunity for them to do more together, to invest more in each other's countries, as something that is coming out of this trip. So this is, look, obviously it's got to be followed up, as we know. These things can start off well, but then if people neglect them, get distracted by other things, they won't be successful. But this has been a really great beginning, and I think the Canadian delegation led by your Prime Minister has had a very big impact here.
All right. Thank you very much for your time today, former Australian
Thank you.
Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.